The $4 billion magnetic levitation train sat dead on the platform. Its sleek silver body was completely silent. Victoria, the CEO of the Transport Corporation, wiped a drop of cold sweat from her forehead. She stared at the government delegation through the glass walls of the VIP lounge. They were checking their watches with growing impatience. If this train did not move in the next 10 minutes, they would pull their funding. Her entire company would collapse before noon. Panic filled the departure terminal as a dozen senior engineers scrambled around glowing diagnostic screens. They were shouting about quantum software glitches and rebooting the mainframe. Nobody paid any attention to the man in the grease-stained high-visibility vest. His name was Arthur. He was just a low-level track maintenance worker, a guy hired to sweep debris and check concrete vibrations. Arthur quietly knelt down at the very edge of the magnetic rail. He ignored the chaos happening around him. He reached into his pocket and pulled out 3 antique copper coins, slowly and deliberately. He stood the 3 coins perfectly upright on the concrete track edge. He stood up and wiped his calloused hands on his pants. Then, he looked directly at Victoria and spoke in a voice that cut right through the noise. "Give me 5 minutes, and this engine will run. But if you step onto that train, you are never coming back." The entire platform went completely silent. Before we dive into exactly what Arthur saw on that track, take a second to subscribe to the channel. And if you believe that you are the only one who controls your path, drop a comment below saying, "I am the master of my own destiny." Now, let's get back to the platform. Marcus, the chief engineer, was the first to break the silence. He marched over to Arthur, with a face completely red with anger. He pointed a shaking finger at the station exits and yelled for security to remove the garbage collector from the sterile zone. He called Arthur a delusional fool who had no business being near a machine of this caliber. Marcus turned to Victoria and insisted that the company's artificial intelligence diagnostic system could never be wrong. He demanded she hand over temporary executive control so he could bypass the safety protocols and force a manual override. Victoria stood frozen between the 2 men. On one side was Marcus, a man with 3 engineering degrees and a spotless corporate record. On the other side was Arthur, a quiet, single father who spent his nights breathing in brake dust just to keep his young son's health insurance active. Arthur did not care about the billions of dollars at stake. He had never worn a tailored suit in his life. He just knew how to put his head down, work hard, and deliver on his promises. He raised his kid with the exact same philosophy. Never let fear stop you, and never let anyone else define your worth. Arthur was a man who understood the sound of metal, much better than the lies of corporate executives. He did not flinch when the security guards grabbed his shoulders. He just kept his eyes locked on Victoria. Victoria looked at the blinking red errors on Marcus's tablet. Then she looked at the calm, unwavering confidence in Arthur's eyes. She felt a strange sense of trust in this man, who had absolutely nothing to lose. She knew what it was like to fight for everything you have built. She raised her hand and ordered the security guards to let him go. When people look down on you, that is exactly when you need to remember who you are. If you have ever been underestimated, remind yourself right now, "I am the master of my own destiny." Marcus threw his hands in the air and warned Victoria that she was committing career suicide. Arthur did not waste a single second arguing with the chief engineer. He grabbed a heavy steel wrench from his tool belt and walked straight to the primary magnetic coupling. He ordered the control room to completely shut down the active noise cancellation system. Marcus laughed out loud, calling the request absolute insanity. But Victoria nodded her head, and the hum of the station died away. In the heavy silence, Arthur tapped his wrench gently against the steel joint. A low vibration echoed down the track. Everyone watched the 3 copper coins standing on the concrete edge. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the first coin stood perfectly still. The third coin did not move an inch, but the coin in the middle began to vibrate violently. It spun in a tight circle and suddenly collapsed flat onto the concrete. Arthur did not look surprised. He knew that this specific microvibration only happened when a magnetic field was intentionally distorted. This was not a software glitch. This was a physical breach. Someone had tampered with the hardware. Marcus's face suddenly lost all its color. He began to sweat heavily. He grabbed his radio and frantically ordered his team to reboot the core software immediately. He was trying to cover up whatever the coins had just revealed, but Victoria stepped in front of him and snatched the radio from his hand. She looked at Arthur and gave him the green light to open the physical engine housing. Arthur grabbed his pry bar and jammed it into the seamless metal casing. He leaned his entire body weight into the tool until the heavy panel popped open with a loud crack. Engineers gasped. As Arthur reached deep into the intricate wiring, he bypassed the glowing fiber optics and pulled out a small foreign circuit board. It was barely the size of a fingernail. It had been welded directly into the magnetic braking system. Arthur held the tiny chip up to the light for everyone to see. He explained in a calm, steady voice exactly what it was designed to do. This little piece of hardware was built to fool the ground sensors. It would allow the train to start up perfectly normal. But the moment this train hit 600 kilometers per hour, the chip would cut the magnetic levitation field. The train would be thrown completely off the tracks. Everyone on board would be killed instantly, and whoever installed it needed top-level security clearance to get past the physical firewalls. If you are still watching, you know the truth is about to come out. So drop one more comment saying, "I am the master of my own destiny." The silence in the station was so heavy you could feel it in your chest. Every engineer, every security guard, and every government official stared at the tiny piece of silicon resting in Arthur's grease-stained palm. Marcus was the first to react, but this time, the arrogant smirk was completely gone from his face. He took a step back, his eyes darting frantically toward the nearest exit. "He planted it!" Marcus screamed, his voice cracking with pure panic. "The janitor planted it. He's trying to frame me, to extort the company. Arrest him right now." But nobody moved. Arthur didn't even blink. He just slowly lowered his hand and looked at the chief engineer with a mixture of pity and absolute disgust. "I sweep the concrete, Marcus," Arthur said quietly. "I don't have the encryption keys to open that specific housing. You designed the biometric locks yourself. Only 3 people in this entire city have the clearance to crack that seal without setting off the mainframe alarms. And I'm pretty sure the CEO and the lead software developer weren't working the graveyard shift last night." Victoria stepped forward. Her high heels clicked sharply against the platform floor. The fear she had felt just 20 minutes ago was completely gone, replaced by a cold, calculated fury. She didn't yell. She didn't have to. She turned to the head of station security and gave a simple, undeniable order. "Pull the gate logs. Now, I want the timestamp for every single person who accessed the lower maintenance bay between midnight and 6 this morning." Marcus tried to push past the security line, claiming he needed to make an emergency phone call to his lawyer. 2 heavy-set guards immediately blocked his path, crossing their arms and shaking their heads. A junior technician, hands shaking, pulled up the raw data on the main departure screen for everyone to see. The bright blue text scrolled down rapidly before highlighting a single entry in bright red. Timestamp 2:14 a.m. Access code Alpha 1. Badge ID Marcus Vance, Chief Engineer. The entire terminal let out a collective gasp. Marcus was trapped, but he was too proud to go down quietly. "My badge was cloned," he spat, sweat pouring down his face. "This is industrial espionage. Someone copied my credentials to take me down." Arthur shook his head slowly. "A cloned badge can open a door, Marcus," Arthur replied, his voice echoing in the quiet station. "But a cloned badge doesn't know the exact torque specifications required to bypass the magnetic pressure valves. You wrote the safety manual on those valves. You bragged about it in the company newsletter last month. You're the only person alive who knows the mechanical blind spots of your own design. Victoria didn't wait for Marcus to come up with another lie. She pulled out her phone and immediately called the federal authorities. While they waited for the police to arrive, the truth started spilling out. Piece by ugly piece. A quick audit of the internal servers by the junior techs revealed a massive, unauthorized data transfer sent from Marcus's terminal just 3 days prior. He had been selling the proprietary magnetic schematics to their biggest overseas competitor. But that wasn't even the worst part. The competitor had paid Marcus a massive 7-figure bribe to stage a catastrophic failure on launch day. The plan was simple and ruthless. Wait for the CEO and the government backers to board the train, let it hit maximum velocity, then let the hidden chip cut the levitation field. The resulting crash would wipe out the leadership, destroy the company's stock, and leave the market wide open for the rival corporation to buy the ashes for pennies on the dollar. Marcus didn't care how many innocent people had to die, as long as his offshore bank account was full. 15 minutes later, federal agents walked onto the platform in dark windbreakers. They slapped handcuffs on the chief engineer, ignoring his pathetic threats and desperate pleas. The man who had spent the entire morning screaming at everyone else was now crying like a child. As they dragged him out of the terminal, Victoria stood near the edge of the platform, watching the flashing red and blue lights fade into the city traffic. She took a deep, shaky breath and turned to face the government delegation. She expected them to tear up the contract right then and there. Instead, the lead delegate, an older man with silver hair, walked up to her and extended his hand. A system is only as good as the people protecting it, the delegate said firmly. You have a lot of mess to clean up, Victoria, but the fact that your company caught an insider threat before a single life was lost tells me you have the integrity to see this project through. We're not pulling the funding. You have our full support. Victoria shook his hand, feeling a massive weight lift off her shoulders. Then, she turned around to look for the man who had just saved her life, her company, and her entire legacy. Arthur was already packing up his tools. He carefully wiped the grease off his wrench, placed it back into his worn leather belt, and zipped up his duffel bag. Victoria walked over to him, stepping carefully over the 3 copper coins that were still lying on the concrete. Arthur, she started, her voice filled with genuine emotion. I don't even know how to begin to thank you. You didn't just save my life today, you saved thousands of lives. I want to offer you the position of Director of Global Safety. Name your salary, you'll have a corner office, a full staff, and you'll never have to sweep a track again. It was the kind of offer most people dream about their entire lives. A golden ticket out of the daily grind. But Arthur just smiled softly and slung his heavy tool bag over his shoulder. I appreciate the offer, ma'am. Truly I do, Arthur said, looking around the massive, high-tech station. But I wouldn't know what to do in a corner office. I'm a man who works with his hands. I like the smell of the grease, and I like feeling the vibrations of the track. It keeps me grounded. It reminds me of what's real. Victoria looked at him, completely stunned by his humility. But you deserve so much more than this, she insisted gently. I have everything I need, Arthur replied. But if you really want to thank me, I do have one condition. Victoria nodded eagerly. Anything. Name it. I want independent sign-off authority, Arthur said, his eyes turning serious. No train leaves this station, no matter what the computers say, no matter what the executives demand, until my team and I physically walk the track and sign the green paper. Real safety doesn't come from a screen. It comes from the ground up. Victoria didn't even hesitate. She agreed immediately. Later that afternoon, the sun was beginning to set over the city, casting a warm golden glow across the streets. Arthur walked out of the massive glass doors of the transit hub, the noise of the corporate world fading behind him. He didn't look like a hero. He just looked like a tired father heading home after a long shift. He walked 2 blocks down to the local elementary school, just in time to see the doors open. A 7-year-old boy with a messy backpack ran out, his face lighting up the second he saw his dad. "Hey buddy, how was school?" Arthur asked, scooping the boy up into a massive hug. "It was awesome, Dad. We learned about magnets," the boy cheered. "How was work? Did you sweep the big train today?" Arthur chuckled, ruffling his son's hair as they started walking down the sidewalk together. "Yeah, buddy. I swept the big train. Just another day at the office." He didn't tell his son about the sabotage, the federal agents, or the billionaire CEO. He didn't need to, because Arthur knew that real power isn't about wearing a fancy suit or having a fancy title. Real power is knowing your own worth. When the rest of the world tries to tell you that you're nothing, it's about having the courage to stand up, speak the truth, and protect the people around you. Even when it's hard, no one gets to decide your value, but you. If you made it this far, you know exactly what to do. Drop that final comment. I am the master of my own destiny. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And never forget the power you hold in your own 2 hands. Stay strong, and I'll see you in the next one.